It's probably best to start with the midline here. The midline, it's got the word mid in it, so that might give you a hint on what we got to do. The lowest we go is -4 on the y-axis. The highest we go is +2. So the midline is the horizontal line that's midway between those 2 points. So you could find the mean. You could do -4 plus 2 makes -2, and -2 divided by 2 makes -1. So this is the midline right here. Okay. So for that equation, it's y equals -1. That's the equation for the midline. And now that we have the midline, now we could find the period. Okay, so let's pick a dot on the midline. I could have picked this one, or I could have started here. It's sinusoidal, so it keeps repeating, so it's up to you where you want to start tracking it. But I've just picked this dot, and I want to find out how many x units I go until I start repeating. And look how they've got the hash marks here. This is pi over 2, that's pi, so that means this starts at x equals pi over 4. Okay, so every time you go another hash mark, you've got another pi over 4 units. So if this is pi plus another pi over 4, that would be 5 pi over 4. And this one's 6 pi over 4, which simplifies to be 3 pi over 2. Okay, so I go down, I come back up. I haven't started repeating myself yet. I start repeating right here, okay? So right here at 5 pi over 4. So it starts at pi over 4, ends at 5 pi over 4. The difference between those two is the period, okay? Because that will tell us how many x units we've gone before we've gone back to our starting location. We start back going down. If you subtract those, you'll get pi, because when you subtract fractions, you have common denominators. So 5 pi over 4 subtracted by 1 pi over 4 makes 4 pi over 4, which is just pi. So that's the period for this one. The amplitude is how high you go from the midline, or how low you go. But it's easier to just say how high because the amplitude is always positive. So here's our midline. Up 1, up 2, up 3. My amplitude of this is 3. And so I think we have enough for an equation. And it says involving cosine. Oh, shoot. So involving cosine. So I'm going to pick a different starting dot than the one I picked here, because cosine, here, if you graph just cosine of x in a graphing calculator, it starts at the peak of the amplitude at x equals 0, okay? So I want to start at the peak of my amplitude. I want to start right up here, and then I go down and up, and I repeat myself every pi units, okay? So I guess I didn't have to do the fractions. I should have picked a different starting dot, because look, if you just start counting from here at x equals 0, you come back to the top of the mountain at pi. That would be a quicker way of telling me what the period was, right? So don't make my mistake. Okay, so it looks like this is a normal cosine. It starts at the top of the amplitude. The amplitude is 2, so I'm going to multiply this by 2. But my period is pi. Cosine of x usually has a period of 2 pi, so that means there must be a number that they're multiplying to x in this function so that we have pi for our period and not 2 pi. So here's the formula for the period. The period of a sine or cosine function is always 2 pi divided by b, where b just stands for the number that's multiplying to x. Okay, and we already know what the period is. The period is supposed to be pi. Okay, so to figure out what b is, I'm going to multiply both sides by b. And I'm trying to get b by itself. So I'm going to divide both sides by pi, so b is going to equal 2. Okay, so now I know what number has to multiply to x. Here, I'm out of room here. We have 2 for the amplitude, and we just found out 2 needs to multiply to x. That way our period is going to be pi. And then you would add or subtract something if you're making a vertical shift. This one has a vertical shift of down 1 unit. In other words, the midline always comes at the end here. It's a -1 for our midline, so I put a -1 at the end. So that's the equation that involves cosine that matches that graph.